When you think of Hawaii, what do you think of? Is it the luscious beaches and majestic volcanoes, the warm greetings and welcoming alohas, or the captivating fire knife and hula dances? Despite its beauty, it has a dark history of a paradise stolen and a people's lost culture. The story of Hawaii goes way back more than 1,000 years, when Polynesian voyagers discovered the island while venturing out the Pacific Ocean in search of new land and opportunities. In here, their own culture and language emerged. They had a complex social system called kapu, headed by the ali'i, magnetic leaders revered as demigods. Hawaiian culture was centered around nature and community. For at least 1,000 years, Native Hawaiians lived as self-reliant citizens isolated from the world. A new era emerged in 1778. In this island paradise, James Cook, an English explorer and commander of the HMS Endeavour, arrived. The arrival of Cook introduced Europeans to Hawaii, a place filled with rich resources that the Europeans took advantage of. Over the next couple centuries, Hawaii would become a key pawn in global military and economic operations. The native Hawaiians would have to fend off the rising power of the Western influence for their self-rule and independence. Hawaii's annexation happened through years of influence peddling and smokescreen treaties that were supported by thinly veiled military threats and political pressure, fueled by white supremacy and money, which eroded the powers of the Hawaiian kingdom. Although the annexation of Hawaii happened peacefully, meaning no bloodshed, it was not the result of an amicable diplomatic process.
To understand the history of Hawaii, we first have to understand why it was so special. This archipelago, consisting of 8 islands, is small yet mighty in resources and strategically located. First, the soil of Hawaii was rich with minerals, made from weathering basaltic lava and volcanic ash. The rich soil of Hawaii supported the growth of many crops and fruits, such as sugarcane and pineapples. Secondly, the Hawaiian Islands' location in the Pacific Ocean was the perfect refueling and servicing point going into the Pacific shores.
U.S. Senator William Henry Sedgwick foresaw in 1851 that the Pacific Ocean, its shores, its islands, and the vast regions beyond would become the chief theater of events in the world's great hereafter.
Whoever wants to access the wealth of Asia needs Hawaii. The United States' rise in influence started in 1820 with the arrival of the first Christian missionaries from New England, shaping not only the faith of the people, including Ka'ahumanu, the queen at the time, but the lasting effects of the arrival of the Christian missionaries were their descendants who stayed and lived and claimed Hawaii as their birthright. In 1850, due to the rising foreign influence, the Resident Alien Act of 1850 was enacted. The law allowed foreigners to own land such as James Dole and to pass land to their descendants, which were patterned according to Western laws. The Hawaiians, to whom land ownership was a strange concept because land belonged to the Akua, or the gods, were slow to comply with the laws, losing their ancestral land to foreign invaders. With the American Civil War of 1861 slamming the American southern plantations, sugar supply was curtailed and prices skyrocketed in the north. In 1875, the first smokescreen treaties were passed. The Reciprocity Treaty was passed, giving Hawaiian sugar and pineapples duty-free access in the United States. This even drove an even more dramatic rise in sugar plantation investments for Americans. In 1886, the United States, in exchange for renewing duty-free sugar exports, demanded that they be allowed to use Pearl Harbor as a fueling station for American Navy carriers. King Kalakaua strongly opposed this. Imagine, what threat to his country's sovereignty would it be if he allowed the strongest navy in the world to be on standby on his coast? On July 6, 1887, the plantation owners, headed by Loren Thuston, a prominent businessman and lawyer and a grandson of American missionaries, forced David Kalakaua to sign the 1887 Constitution of the Hawaiian Kingdom under the pretense of a more equitable law for the Hawaiian people. It became known as the Bayonet Constitution, as he was held at gunpoint to sign the document. The Bayonet Constitution limited the powers of Hawaii's monarchy, made the legislature all-powerful, and granted voting rights to Americans and Europeans, and only to property owners, marginalizing the votes of the native Hawaiians. As a result of this, the native people of Hawaii lost control of the Hawaiian kingdom. When Queen Liliuokalani, King Kalakaua's heir and sister, rose to the throne, she attempted to draft a new constitution meant to restore some power back to the monarchy and gave back voting rights to the native Hawaiian citizens. But a group of 13 businessmen named the Committee of Safety had other ideas, hatching a plan of their own to defend their status quo. What happened on January 17, 1893 was the culmination of years of thinly veiled political and military intimidation. The pawns were moving, the knights were in place, and the monarch was soon to be a checkmate. This happened with the blessing of the U.S. Legislation Minister, John L. Stevens, in support of the Committee of Safety. Stevens agreed on the 5 military time. On January 16th, the leading of the USS Boston troops arrived ashore on Honolulu. The next day, members of the Citizens Committee of Safety gathered in front of the government building facing the Iolani's Palace and read a proclamation to those gathered expressing their desire to abrogate the monarchy, dethrone the Queen, and establish their own provisional government. The United States claims the U.S. troops were used to protect themselves, but a deeper analysis into the actions of the United States shows how their motives were different than what they had led on. The arrival of the U.S. troops with military backup proved how it was not only for the purpose of protecting life and property of the American people, but also group sponsored by a foreign power with the job of overthrowing the monarchy. James H. Blount, a U.S. Special Commissioner who was appointed to investigate and conduct a full report for the President of the United States of Affairs and Facts on Hawaii. Blount was there the day of January 17th, and from his perspective, the United States was prepared for the war against the Hawaiians. As Blount suggested,
a building was chosen where there was no troop stations, where there was no struggle to be made to obtain access, with an American force immediately contiguous, with a massive population impressed with its unfriendly attitude.
Intimidated by military superiority and force, the Queen and her supporters were arrested to prevent violent bloodshed. Forced to abdicate the throne, the Hawaiian monarch no longer ruled. And at the urging of Lauren Thurston, appointed him as the President of the Republic. Instead, Sanford Dole, lawyer and son of American Protestant missionaries, established a provisional government called the Republic of Hawaii. But the annexation of Hawaii did not come as easily as the members of the Committee of Safety thought it would. As the Republic of Hawaii were busy trying to get Hawaii annexed by the United States, the government under U.S. President Grover Cleveland refused to annex Hawaii because he claimed that he was ashamed of the whole affair. Yet after his term, William McKinley supported the Committee of Safety in their ideas of annexing Hawaii, supporting the treaty that would annex the territory. Matters worse for the Hawaiians, the United States saw Hawaii's strategic location as the perfect fueling station for the military base in the Pacific. This was a great factor that overturned the Congress to reevaluate the need of Hawaii as Hawaii became more valuable to them with the Spanish-American War raging. Thus, in 1898, with the urging of President William McKinley, Hawaii was officially annexed in the U.S. Congress on behalf of the Joint Resolution, or New Lands Resolution, on July 7, 1898.
Beyond the loss of their independence, Hawaiians lost their land and heritage. Over the next years, what happened next was a systematic eradication of the Hawaiian way of life and identity. The Organic Act of 1900s further formalized U.S. rule over Hawaii by superseding Hawaiian historical laws. In addition to that, the U.S. educational system forbade the Hawaiian language in 1896. One of the greatest impacts of the annexation was how the foreign population skyrocketed and the native Hawaiians became the minority of their own land, further eroding Hawaiian culture and ways of life. Although Hawaii is one of the wealthiest states in the U.S., its poverty-stricken population lives homeless. In 2016, even if Native Hawaiians made up only 10% of the state's population, 42% of them were dispossessed. Not only did the native people of Hawaii have their lands taken away and destroyed by the Westerners, but Hawaii's culture also suffered from its commercialized tourism and military facilities.
The Army in Hawaii has expanded enormously. Today, the Hawaiian Islands represent a multi-million-dollar base of operations for American defense forces in the Pacific Ocean area.
In return, this has caused serious environmental impacts, such as heavy amounts of radioactive garbage, fuel, and mercury in the sea. With that, a group of pro-sovereignty movements have emerged over the past decades in hopes of reclaiming their lost culture and land, such as the LHG, Lawful Hawaiian Government, a cultural and political campaign that hopes to establish an autonomous and independent nation from the U.S. When we say Hawaii, what do we think of? Do we really remember the brave queen who abdicated to prevent bloodshed, or are we blinded from the fun and beautiful beaches? Do we really know the relevance of the sacred hula dance, or is it just a gig tourists expect to see on their trip to Hawaii? When a war was physically fought, the United States battled Hawaii in a different way. They penetrated their culture and usurped their land. So the next time you go to Hawaii, take time to remember and pay tribute to the Hawaiian culture and way of life, their love for nature and community, and please respect their land. The United States annexed Hawaii as a result of dissensious diplomatic processes, which till this day are debated on whether the United States' actions were legal.